the way we approached hydroxychloroquine is we said, look, we'll work with ministries of health. If they request of us to provide the medicine, we will provide it to those ministries of health under the assurance that they use it with hospitalized patients and with appropriate control measures in place. We felt that was our obligation as one of the largest producers of generic medicines in the world. That's what we did. We were prepared to do the studies. The studies now, of course, have not indicated that the medicine is providing a significant benefit, so we adjust. Now, if you look at what we're doing on top of that now in our generics portfolio, earlier this month, we committed to providing 15 medicines that the WHO recommends for patients with COVID-19 at no profit to 79 low-income and low-middle-income countries around the world, including dexamethasone, which is a medicine that's been demonstrated in the UK to have a mortality benefit. That's just another example of us trying to step up and do whatever we can to help countries cope with this pandemic. And in the meantime, we have multiple pivotal studies ongoing with our existing medicines. We have over 20 medicines and investigator-initiated trials for COVID. And we have a big research program trying to identify novel coronavirus drugs that could be used for this pandemic and future pandemics. So it's all part of the story of being a science-based medicines company.
Vas, one of the interesting conversations I had yesterday was with the Russian finance minister. We were talking about some of the hacking allegations that have been leveled at the Russians around pharmaceutical businesses. I'm just interested, I mean, you're obviously at the other end of this story in a sense. One, do you feel that your systems and servers are under continuous attack by foreign entities that are trying to gain access to any research you're doing in this area? And two, how do you feel about the beggar thy neighbour approach that we're seeing at an international level between countries trying to get their hands on first medication here? Because inevitably that must be putting a huge amount of pressure on CEOs like you who are having to figure out who to sell medicines to.
Yeah, and the first part of the question, cybersecurity is one of the top risks for Novartis, I think for most large corporations. We have significant investments over the recent years. We've had to ramp up further our investments to monitor our systems on an ongoing basis, strengthen our ability. Thankfully, we've not had any significant issues to date. But investments in cybersecurity is something that's on my desk. We have a dedicated team. We review it at the executive committee level of Novartis on an ongoing basis. And I do think it is a risk from multiple sources, that issues with cybersecurity of our key systems. So I'm hopeful that, technology will stay ahead of some of these threats, but it's something that's certainly, a key risk. I think from, the international approach to trying to allocate medicines and vaccines, this has been with us for many pandemics, if you go back over time. Unfortunately, we have not been able to come up with an international approach which really would ensure that the vaccines or medicines go to the highest risk populations around the world, as opposed to trying to cover one country's population disproportionately at the expense of another. I think many have said rightfully that if COVID-19 exists anywhere, then it exists everywhere. So we have to have a more thoughtful approach, but it is a challenge. Our approach is to really work with governments consistently around the world and really not try to play into nationalistic tendencies to enable our medicines to be broadly available. I think the real test will come if, in our case, if some of our medicines hit in the second half, then of course we'll have to navigate these complexities.
Vas, now I know Novartis is not in the business of making and manufacturing vaccines, but when we spoke back in January in Basel, your best guess at that point was that a vaccine would take at least 12 months to produce. I think in the spring you were looking at possibly we wouldn't have one until the end of 2021. What's your best guess today as to when a vaccine will be available?
Yeah, I've learned not to put out my guesses too often, but what I would say is that it's really important we follow the data and follow the science. Phase 1 results don't always translate into phase 3 results. That's one important point. We need vaccines that are immunogenic, but then also that the immune response persists over time and protects people over time. We need very safe vaccines that don't cause any unintended consequences. But the most important step right now is to figure out if the results, exciting results we're seeing in the early phase, really translate in practice in large-scale, late-stage clinical trials. An antibody is not an antibody is not an antibody. We need antibodies that ultimately protect patients and do so in a safe way. I would also note that there's very good regulatory guidance out there now from both the U.S. and Europe as to what they expect from a vaccine. And I think it's important that the vaccines meet those standards. 50% efficacy in the case of the U.S. with 6-month safety follow-up from the last patient. Those are all, I think, critical parameters to get a safe and effective vaccine that the public can trust. One of the things I'm most worried about is we don't want a vaccine out there that then people don't want to take because they don't trust the science behind it.